Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation, and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role, and voice of professional translators.
Today, we are honored to welcome a psychologist and a creativity scientist, Professor Vlad Glǎveanu from Dublin City University. Today, we are going to talk about creativity from a psychological perspective. Professor Glǎveanu, welcome.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Hello. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your research?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a psychologist by training. I'm a social psychologist, or more specifically, sociocultural psychologist. It's kind of a niche thing, but I've been studying creativity for 15 plus years now. And more recently, I'm developing with many colleagues this field of possibility studies that I'll be happy to talk about later. I'm based in Dublin, but I'm originally from Romania. Studied in London, had my first job in Denmark in academia, then Switzerland. And I also work a little bit in Norway. Yeah, I do a little round of Europe here. But yeah, my work is a lot about creativity, imagination, wonder, collaboration, perspective taking, technology, education, and possibility studies. I would say these are my keywords. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you, Vlad. So, as a top expert who has studied creativity for many years, how would you define creativity in the simplest term?
In the simplest terms, that's a tough one. That's a tough question. So creativity is obviously very complex, and there are standard definitions in psychology. Like in psychology, people would say something is creative when it is novel, original, and valuable or useful. So it's a kind of a double criteria. Novelty and originality have to do with how surprising or new or unexpected something is, and value with does it serve a purpose. But actually, I have a wider definition than that. And by the way, this doesn't really tell us how we are creative, but it's still useful to have as a definition, which is the emergence of meaningful novelties within and between minds and in society. So meaningful novelties is a very wide category that includes anything from children's drawings to, the works of genius.
That is so inspiring.
Thanks.
So from your social cultural psychological perspective, can creativity actually be trained or enhanced?
Well, absolutely. That's what makes a difference sometimes between somebody who works more on personality or even, well, cognition is very adaptable. So cognitive scientists would probably say the same. But from a social psychological perspective, yes, creativity depends on context. It depends on the environment. There are things we come with to this context. We come with what in creativity would call creative potential, if you want. But to turn it into achievement, you need a specific environment. So in education, we try to shape that environment. So we create conditions for people to feel trust and safety, psychological safety, to be able to play. And that's really kind of the engine of how they become creative.
So you think environment is super important for creativity?
Absolutely. I mean, if I don't say that as a social psychologist, who will? But I'm going to make a side comment here. For many people, the environment is something that happens before or after the act of creativity. So you talk to people, then you go in your corner and you create your idea or your project, and then you go back and you talk to other people and you make it happen. Or so for many, the act of creating happens in isolation. You have to be alone, and many people actually prefer to create alone. My perspective, and it's not only my perspective, is that you're never alone because our minds are intrinsically social. We're connected to others. We build on ideas and perspectives that exist in society from other people. So the environment, the view of others, the use of materials and tools is absolutely essential for any act of creativity.
So speaking of active creativity, you also pioneered a beautiful new field called possibility studies.
Yes.
Is that And for most people, it's easy to focus on what is, but hard to focus on what could be.
Oh, yes.
Could
Absolutely.
you tell us why this human ability to explore
Yeah,
possibilities is so crucial?
absolutely. Well, it's been like, as I said, 10, 15 years since I studied a lot of creativity and not only imagination and other things. And it was
Mhm.
through wonder with an O, an interest I still have that I kind of not shifted, but expanded my own concerns and my interests. So the possible is what creativity is kind of all about, but not only creativity. If you look at agency, innovation, play,
Mhm.
curiosity, wonder, futures thinking, it is about this human kind of propensity to live at the same time within the here and now of experience and within many other spaces of what could be, what could have been, what might be, and what can never be. You know, the impossible is a very fertile category, utopian thinking. So creativity is a big part of this landscape, but actually possibility studies is the meeting point for people who study creativity, agency, play, counterfactual, serendipity, futures, all to come together and cross-fertilize theories and methods and practice.
Wow, you've completely reframed how we think about creativity.
It's very kind.
How do we actually enter this space of potentials? And this naturally brings us to a core word of your theory, perspective taking, right?
Yes. Yes, exactly. You're offering the answer already, because yes, I do think a lot. So what is the possible? In everyday language, you say, oh, it's possible, or it's not possible, or it might be. So it looks like an alternative to something. But actually, the way I like to think a lot about it is a new perspective on reality, on objects, on problems, on ourselves.
Mhm.
And where do new perspectives come from? Well, oftentimes, again, from this social interaction and the ideas of others and so on. So being able to kind of mentally be flexible and move around and adopt a new perspective, a new point of view is a huge engine of possibility and eventually of creative practice. And just to say for those who think, but what is the difference exactly between possibility thinking, which by the way is a construct, I didn't invent it, it was invented before, and creative thinking. In creativity, going back to the definition, because I just mentioned it, we really want the outcomes to be new, original, like there is a value to being different, which is very interesting and very valuable. With possibility, you don't have to be different. You just have to think outside of what is. So it's kind of a bit of a wider category.
Mhm. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But to me, there seems to be a paradox here.
Yeah.
So, to change perspectives, we obviously need a certain level of freedom
Yeah.
to move around. Yet another core part of your theory says that the creativity actually requires constraints.
Yes.
How should we understand this contradiction between needing freedom but also needing limits?
Ah, beautiful question. And it goes back to, we talked about the individual and the social.
Mhm.
At the same time, and I'm going to come back to freedom and constraints, but it's very similar. How do we think of these paradoxes? They're apparent paradoxes because things are not as black and white. There is no
Sure.
individual without the social, no social without
Yeah.
individuals. There is no freedom without constraints. So they are intrinsically connected with each other. If there are no boundaries, you get blocked, or you get demotivated. So there is always a bit of an optimum that needs to be found. And actually, when you create, you explore freely within constraints, and sometimes you become aware of constraints and play with those constraints as well. But just to say, I'm one of these people who I don't hate, it's a big word, but I dislike this idea, thinking outside of the box. You think outside of the box. There are always boxes, the way our minds work, sadly, and through language, by the way, is we categorize. What's important is to realize the boxes, linguistic or otherwise, that we use and be able to be flexible enough to expand, combine, or just, yeah, kind of use larger or smaller boxes in a flexible way.
So what you mean is we can use both freedom and the boundaries.
I think we do that at the same time. It's a negotiation of freedom within constraints. That's how I would put
Yeah.
it.
Okay, great. And in our pursuit of possibility and perspective taking, we inevitably make mistakes or even face failures. Even we have freedom and we make failures. in your research, how do you view the role and value of making mistakes in the creative process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a huge and great question again. A lot of why children, as they grow up, they stop being as expressive as they tend to be and so
Yeah,
on. It's
yeah.
the fear of judgment, is the fear of failure. And that's kind of inscribed in us, sadly, by education. My mom was an art teacher. She's now retired. So I have great appreciation for teachers. I'm a teacher at university level as well. So it's a big task, but we need to rethink how we educate people to be comfortable with risk taking, to be playful enough, to have the trust, and the safety to explore. Of course, we're not talking here about capital failures that would endanger oneself and others. We need to put some barriers. Speaking of constraints, by the way. But if you don't have this freedom, again, to explore and experiment, then yes, you're going to cut off a big part of creativity. So you need the methods to make people comfortable and to connect them, if not directly with play, because many people feel uncomfortable playing, with the idea of playfulness, humor. There's so many ways to get to a playful state of mind.
So even for adults, you encourage people to make mistakes.
Absolutely. I make them all the time.
Okay, I see. So I think time to back to the audience. If we look at the translators, this is their everyday reality. They look for possibilities under strict constraints, and they often make mistakes along the way. And from a psychological perspective, would you say a job like translation is a very high level of creativity?
Yes. So I'm going to be on record and I'm going to say absolutely. Like, we have certain domains that we privilege culturally, and it might vary with different cultural spaces, geographical and so on. But we collectively, or in the West, we tend to look at art as highly creative, but we make these differences. For example, mathematics, if we go there, is it really creative? Or translation, if you translate, if you look, it's a dynamic where people think you're looking for the best word, therefore you're not allowing yourself to do other words than just that best equivalent. But adjusting and finding that best word, it requires exploration, requires imagination, actually requires a deep understanding and perspective taking. So, that's a great example. And I'm going to tell you, my PhD was on Easter egg decoration practices in Romanian communities. So people would not think craft, and there is the craft of translation. I mean, many things we do are actually crafts or crafts in nature. But people think of high art, and like in this case, like the creator of the literary text and so on, but they fail to see the micro acts of creativity and possibility thinking that are fundamental for human existence, that happen when you paint eggs or you translate a text. Yeah.
Okay. So you think translation is a super high level creativity?
I think so, because actually the more challenging the constraints, the more intense this search and expertise plays such a great role. I mean, across the board it would, but with translation, I think even more, there is almost like an ease, a flow. People talk about states of flow. When you get into a state of flow, and I think you're kind of intrinsically motivated, consumed by what you do. I'm not a translator, but I'm sure many translators kind of get into that. And it's a fascinating activity for sure.
But nowadays there is a paradox, which is fascinating as well, happening in reality. With the rapid rise of AI and the machine translation, many brilliant translators, they are losing their confidence and feeling anxious about their career. So from a perspective of a creativity expert, how do you view this shock that technology brings to us?
Well, I mean, AI is coming for many things and all sorts of creativity. But the question of creativity is actually an argument for why we need human translation or human creation in general, because AI can be a partner in creating, but AI does not create in and of itself, because AI doesn't understand the world in the way humans do. We tend to humanize AI and think that it means, intends, or understands language. Does not understand language. It's just a predictive model. So if you really want not only high quality translation, but this human capacity, again, to imagine what the text is and to resonate more deeply with it, it cannot be a game of just predicting the next word. Translation, just like language, is not a mathematical formula. I mean, it has some correspondences and a grammar, so rules, absolutely. But main, and again, it's not my field, but I love thinking about language and all, it's the metaphorical function. And that's the space of possibility, the fact that one object can be described with multiple words, and the fact that one word can describe multiple realities. I mean, it's the signifier and signified coming together in a multiple open relationship in the end. And I think that we would be missing enormously if we didn't have this intersubjective human aspect coming into appreciating and creating like this.
Okay, but nowadays AI can write poems, paint, and translate quite well.
Yeah, no, it does. It does do. I mean, it's surprisingly good. Like, of course, you need to wonder beyond the surface, is it really a high level creativity? And there are studies showing that we reverse or we go towards the average often with AI because it is the most likely answer. And of course, there are ways to change the temperature of AI and create more random combinations. So I think this is an opportunity because in translation, of course, you work with language and creativity. I was telling you that culture and tools are very important. They have such an intimate connection because language is more than just words. It's also the emotional resonance. It's also kind of a visual or kind of pictorial representation of things. I think it gives us a chance to understand more deeply how we use language, how we use it as humans, and how we create. I think it really pushes us, and I don't have all the answers here, but it pushes us to think, what is human creativity vis-a-vis, AI creativity, and what is the act of translation that goes beyond just matching words? And I think the answer is and has to be that there is more to it than that.
So in your eyes, what is this boundary between a machine's intelligence and the human's true creativity?
Well, that's a great question. I think studies are being done when you have an output and it could be created by AI or humans, and you ask others to estimate or to evaluate, and you will see very soon, and we know this reality that although AI is producing more and more, with all the environmental and all the other costs involved, AI slop is becoming, something that people are really fed up with. So I think that there is a reaction to that. The reaction is coming, obviously, and the AI bubble, if it is a bubble, might also burst or change at some point. But the thing about, what makes it different is that we are embodied human beings who have a position and who have an emotional life that AI cannot possibly. I mean, even if we talk about conscious agentic AI or, these new things that people talk about, either it will take a while for it to come into being, but even then, hardwire versus human bodies will always be different. And just to give you an example, there are online all sorts of funny videos where AI is being explained something spatial, and it's asked a very simple question around a spatial relationship, and it doesn't get it. And the reason it doesn't get it is because it's beyond logic. You have to have a body to get that. And I feel
that's interesting.
We will always have that advantage. And language is also embodied. I mean, there's great work on metaphors as ways of, carrying this embodiment into language. So we'll always have that over it, I would think.
Yeah, true. I agree. Okay, great. So another question is that to achieve brilliant cultural results, translators sometimes need to make daring, non-traditional choices that strict rules might forbid. How can translators gain the confidence to make these bold, creative leaps that machines might never dare to try?
Well, it goes back to identity. I mean, I've done some studies on creative identity, creative mindsets. You can be a very creative person, practice creativity every day, and we do it to different degrees, but we might not have creative confidence, or we might not think of ourselves as creative. And I think that's where it would be useful for translators to take ownership and reflect on what is creativity and how do I express it, because we create our own barriers. The more we think of ourselves as less creative, or the less we get to actually create or do things. So that's a big challenge, and it's not only for translators, but culturally, and it would be interesting to look at how translators are educated and what the educational system tells them and so on and so forth. Where do these ideas come from that it is either less creative work or the risks are too big? And role modeling would be interesting. So either in your project or whoever is listening, you can think, who are those role models among translators who can speak and show and kind of inspire people to recognize, but also to see themselves as creative translators. Maybe that's another category we need to institute, creative translators. There we go.
Wow. I like the word creative translators. And in your book, Wonder, you talked about the massive power of ordinary surprise. Today, many translators spend hours translating, post-editing, and how can they rediscover a sense of wonder, which is in book and in their daily life?
I think wonder is something, first of all, philosophy and inquiry are very connected to wonder. Is when we have this time, and it can be a privilege to have the time to wonder in today's world, where you allow yourself to question things, to question them more deeply than you would normally. So wonder allows us to go beyond the surface. And I think when we wonder, with a capital W, we problematize things that we usually take for granted. And I think when we use language, there's so many things that, again, we either do automatically and using those hints that everyday life always throws at us, these little surprises or things we don't understand, to just dig deeper and allow ourselves to marvel at what it means to use language, what it means to be a human being, what it means to interact with AI. I mean, that's a huge topic of wondering, right? We're doing part of it right now. And wonder is also thriving on these new perspectives and not knowing fully what is happening because, it deals with a lot of complexity. So I think accepting that not knowing is not just this frustrating state where, oh, I failed because I don't know, but actually not understanding is a resource for wondering. It's a motivation to wonder and to keep wondering. And I would love to invite translators or people in general who use language, which is kind of everybody, right? To think how is it that we use the words we use? I mean, just visiting a different country can give you an immense sense of wonder around language. How do we grow up on the same planet with similar-ish constitutions, biologically and so on, to think and speak of the world so differently? That's a huge topic of wonderment.
Okay, great. So to be willing to wonder, what's your single most important message of encouragement to all the creators and the creative minds?
Well, there's so many messages. So first of all, wonder matters. With some people, it's an annoyance. Socrates was a big promoter of wonder, got to be pushed to drink poison because it was corrupting the mind of the young. So I think it's this idea that we give value to these spaces of thinking in possibilities. We often want to be pragmatic, to cut to the chase, to do the most efficient thing. That's what AI systems often do, by the way, for us, but they cut out the actual wondering about the world. And yes, it can be a privilege, and yes, not every time we have the opportunity to do it, but wondering transforms the self. You exist differently as a being when you start wondering. Philosophy is born in wonder, but humanity, I think, is the origin of humanism and what it means to be a human. So I'm a big advocate. I think appreciating that is the beginning of trying to see how you wonder, what makes you wonder. There is no general formula here.
Okay, cool. It's wonderful. I think your thoughts are quite inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us, Vlad. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you again to our invited speaker, and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes, and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.